It all began with a whisper, a secret so tightly held that even the inner circle of Buckingham Palace would have hesitated to speak it aloud. Yet, today, for the first time, it has been revealed. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, allegedly wore a fake baby bump during the time surrounding Lilibet's supposed pregnancy. And the source? None other than her private nurse, someone who had sworn absolute discretion, someone trusted implicitly by Meghan herself. But now, that trust has shattered, leaving questions, doubts, and a trail of shocking implications in its wake. How could this be? Why would someone at the pinnacle of royal attention resort to such a ruse? And most importantly, what does this mean for the royal family, and for the truth the public thought they knew? Let's pause for a moment. Imagine the headlines, the whispers of gossip, the subtle nods of incredulity in the corridors of palaces across the globe. To claim that Meghan, a figure already under intense public scrutiny, manipulated the narrative of her own pregnancy, is not just controversial, it's explosive. And yet, the nurse's words are not just allegations. They are backed by what insiders describe as irrefutable evidence. The documents, the medical notes, and even timestamps of hospital visits that don't align with a normal gestation timeline, all point toward one uncomfortable possibility: that what the world saw might have been carefully staged. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You might be wondering, how did this secret come to light now? Why has it taken years for someone close to her to finally speak? That, in itself, is a story worth unraveling. According to sources close to the nurse, it was months of internal conflict, moral dilemma, and fear of legal repercussions that kept her silent. But something changed recently. Perhaps it was the mounting pressure of public speculation, or maybe it was a personal need to reveal the truth before it was lost forever. Whatever the trigger, her decision to speak has set off a chain reaction that no one, including the royal family, was ready for. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To fully understand the gravity of this revelation, we need to step back. The story begins long before Meghan entered the palace with her charm, charisma, and very public media presence. Meghan's life has always been under a microscope, from her Hollywood career to her relationship with Prince Harry, and ultimately, to her role as Duchess of Sussex. Every appearance, every statement, and every public gesture was dissected, debated, and analyzed. And when Lilibet's pregnancy was announced, it was met with a global outpouring of joy, congratulations, and speculation. Baby clothes were shown, carefully curated Instagram posts released, and royal photographers captured staged maternity moments designed to cement the narrative. But according to the nurse, not all of it was as it seemed. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was reportedly tense. Staff members whispered, aides exchanged knowing glances, and even members of the royal family were reportedly puzzled by inconsistencies. Ultrasound schedules that didn't match up with public announcements, dietary regimes that seemed contradictory, and secretive medical appointments that left even the closest advisors scratching their heads. All of it created a web of questions. And at the center of it, Meghan herself. Was this a deliberate effort to control the narrative? Or was it simply a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by royal secrecy? The nurse's testimony suggests the former. Here's where it gets even more intriguing. The nurse claims that she personally witnessed Meghan adjusting her bump for public appearances. Small, almost imperceptible adjustments, a slight padding here, a shift of fabric there, meant to convince cameras, photographers, and the public that a pregnancy was progressing normally. But behind closed doors, according to the nurse, there was no growing belly, no physical signs, only careful planning and meticulous timing. This isn't just gossip. These are accounts from someone trained to notice medical details, someone whose job was to monitor health and ensure authenticity. And when the person responsible for care starts questioning reality, you know something is deeply amiss. Now, consider the emotional stakes. For Prince Harry, Meghan's husband, the public portrayal of their family was a point of pride, a shield against relentless media intrusion. Did he know? Was he complicit, or was he, like the public, being misled? And what about the staff, the medical team, the palace officials who had to balance protocol with secrecy? Every layer adds a new complexity to an already bewildering scenario. What the nurse revealed is more than just a personal confession. It's a window into a carefully orchestrated narrative that had global implications. And then there's the timing. Why reveal this now? In the past few months, whispers of royal tensions, leaked documents, and legal battles involving Meghan have dominated headlines. Perhaps the nurse felt emboldened, sensing that the public and the courts, if necessary, were ready for the truth. Or perhaps she knew that if she waited any longer, the story would be buried under layers of misinformation, impossible to verify. Whatever the reason, her decision to speak has ignited a firestorm that shows no signs of cooling. And the media? They are already circling, ready to dissect every word, every claim, every nuance of her statements. This revelation also forces a deeper question. Why would someone feel the need to fabricate a pregnancy, even partially? The motives, as suggested by insiders, are as complex as they are controversial. Power, control, image management, or perhaps a desperate attempt to protect personal privacy. Each factor could have played a role. But one thing is clear. If true, this revelation changes not just the perception of Meghan Markle, but also the public understanding of the events surrounding Lilibet's birth. What we thought we knew, what the royal family presented as joyous, natural, and spontaneous, may now appear as calculated, manipulated, and orchestrated. And for a family already under intense scrutiny, that's a seismic shift. And yet, there's a human element to this story that can't be ignored. The nurse, who had dedicated years to caring for Meghan, speaks not from malice, but from a sense of moral obligation. Her words carry weight because they come from proximity, trust, and first-hand observation. This isn't speculation from tabloids or anonymous leaks. This is testimony from someone who was in the room, who witnessed what was happening, and who decided that the truth, however uncomfortable, needed to be told. But telling the truth comes at a cost. She has risked professional ruin, personal attacks, and legal threats. And still, she speaks. Now let's zoom out. Beyond the royal drama, beyond the speculation, there is a narrative tension that grips the public imagination. The story of authenticity versus performance. In an age where public figures are constantly curated, photographed, and analyzed, what happens when the performance becomes reality? When the lines blur, when even the people closest to the subject begin to doubt what they see. Meghan Markle's alleged use of a fake baby bump is more than a scandal. It's a mirror to society's obsession with appearances, with perfection, with narrative control. And it forces all of us to ask, if someone with so much to lose can manipulate reality, what does that say about the stories we accept as truth? And just when it seems like we've reached the edge of the revelation, the nurse drops a bombshell. There were moments of panic, moments when Meghan allegedly had to stop public appearances because the ruse was at risk of being exposed. Cameras, public events, even casual walks, each required meticulous planning to maintain the illusion. A small slip, and the carefully constructed narrative could collapse, with consequences that might extend far beyond palace walls. And according to insiders, there was one incident, in particular, that nearly unraveled everything. A medical appointment, a surprise visit from a family member, a detail missed, all of it combined to create a tense, almost cinematic scenario that would leave even seasoned palace staff on edge. But what makes this story truly gripping isn't just the deception itself, it's the fallout. Social media is already buzzing, opinions are divided, and historians are likely to debate the implications for decades. Was this a simple case of personal image management? Or does it signify a deeper, more calculated effort to control public perception? And what about the future of royal transparency? The ramifications are staggering, and the answers are far from simple. As we dive deeper into this story, you'll see how every detail, every revelation, every secret connects, culminating in a narrative that is as dramatic as any royal drama ever produced on screen. And just when you think you've grasped the scale of the revelation, here comes the cliffhanger, the moment that will keep you watching. According to the nurse, there is one piece of evidence so shocking, so concrete, that it could change everything we think we know about Lilibet's birth, Meghan's pregnancy, and even Prince Harry's role in this drama. It's a detail that was hidden in plain sight, overlooked by the public, but seen clearly by those on the inside. And when we get to that part of the story, you'll realize Have you ever wondered what it takes to convince the world that something is real, when in truth, it's carefully staged? When Meghan Markle stepped onto the public stage, cradling her baby bump, cameras flashing and royal fans cheering, millions saw an image of joy, motherhood, and authenticity. But behind that radiant smile, insiders now claim a very different story was unfolding, one that would shock even the most seasoned royal watchers. It began with subtle inconsistencies. A slightly odd curve in a dress here, a perfectly timed pause there, moments that might have seemed insignificant to the casual observer but raised alarms among palace staff. According to the nurse, these were not accidental. Every appearance was planned, she said. Every angle, every photo opportunity, every smile. It was all rehearsed to maintain the illusion. And it wasn't just the public appearances. Even private family gatherings were meticulously choreographed. Padding, strategically placed clothing, and careful posture were all part of the maintenance routine. The stakes were high. Imagine living under constant scrutiny, every move dissected, every expression analyzed. For Meghan, the pressure was immense. To maintain the illusion of pregnancy while managing a public persona, a private life, and intense media attention, she had to be constantly aware of how she appeared in photographs, videos, and in person. The nurse described it as walking a tightrope, where one misstep could unravel months of planning. But why go to such lengths? To answer that, we need to understand the dual pressures Meghan faced. On one side, there was the weight of the royal family, the expectations of tradition, protocol, and public appearances. On the other, there was the relentless scrutiny of the media. Every story, every tweet, every headline was a reminder that perception was reality. In such an environment, controlling the narrative isn't just desirable, it can feel essential. And according to insiders, that desire for control may have driven some of the most controversial decisions surrounding Lilibet's supposed pregnancy. One of the most startling revelations from the nurse involved the medical visits. Publicly, Meghan's prenatal appointments were celebrated with smiles and social media updates, creating the impression of a normal, healthy pregnancy. Behind the scenes, however, the nurse alleges that many appointments were staged or carefully timed to align with public appearances. There were gaps, appointments canceled at the last minute, and ultrasounds that didn't match the timeline the public was shown, she explained. These discrepancies, she said, were not accidental. They were part of a carefully constructed narrative designed to maintain appearances. It wasn't just the logistics that were tricky. The emotional toll, according to the nurse, was enormous. Imagine the stress of maintaining a physical illusion day after day, of convincing everyone, including your closest allies, that a pregnancy is progressing normally. The nurse spoke of moments when Meghan would break down in private, worried that someone would see through the facade. There were tears, anxiety, and even instances of panic when appearances didn't go as planned. It was a psychological balancing act as much as a physical one. And yet, Meghan appeared confident. To the public, she radiated the calm, composed demeanor of a mother-to-be enjoying her pregnancy. Every photograph, every video, every interview reinforced the narrative of authenticity. But according to the nurse, this was a masterful performance. The smile, the posture, the gentle touches to her stomach, they were all part of the act, the nurse said. She was convincing herself as much as she was convincing everyone else. The nurse also revealed a startling dynamic with Prince Harry. Contrary to public perception, insiders claim that Harry was not fully aware of the extent of the staging. He saw what he wanted to see, the nurse said. He believed in the image, trusted Meghan, and did not question the details behind closed doors. But the nurse hinted at moments of tension between the couple, subtle disagreements that never reached the public eye. He was protective, yes, but there were times he was uneasy, she added. The exact nature of that unease remains unclear, but it adds another layer of complexity to the unfolding story. Then there was the palace staff, caught in a web of secrecy and obligation. According to sources, many staff members noticed inconsistencies but felt powerless to speak. Royal protocol, combined with loyalty and fear of repercussions, created an environment where silence was mandatory. We all knew something was off, the nurse admitted. But the rules of the palace are very strict. You follow orders, you don't ask questions, and you certainly don't challenge the narrative. Yet, the nurse's eventual decision to speak out reveals just how much pressure had been building behind the scenes, pressure that could no longer be contained. The nurse also described a particularly tense moment that could have exposed the illusion entirely. During a private visit to a family member, Meghan allegedly had to pause, adjust her bump, and rehearse her expressions for several minutes before entering the room. It was a small, almost imperceptible act, but it highlights the lengths to which she allegedly went to maintain the public perception of a pregnancy. If anyone had noticed, everything would have collapsed, the nurse said. It was a delicate, high-stakes performance, and one mistake could ruin everything. And then there were the public reactions. Millions of people celebrated the news of Lilibet's birth, sharing excitement, love, and support. Social media exploded with messages of congratulations, celebrities posted tributes, and even political figures acknowledged the joyous occasion. Yet behind the scenes, according to insiders, the reality was far more complicated. The nurse hinted that the public perception of happiness and authenticity was precisely what Meghan and her team wanted to project. Every carefully curated photograph, every staged appearance, every smile was part of a broader effort to control the narrative and maintain influence over how the public and the media understood events. This chapter of the story also raises broader questions about trust, authenticity, and perception. How much of what we see online, in media, or even in official communications can be trusted? When someone has the motivation, resources, and skills to manipulate appearances, what becomes real? And what does this mean for the public's understanding of Meghan Markle, her family, and the events surrounding Lilibet's birth? But just when you think you've grasped the full picture, the nurse drops a revelation that makes everything even more complicated. According to her, there was one incident that nearly exposed the entire ruse, not to the public, but within the palace itself. A sudden inspection, a surprise visit, or perhaps a miscommunication created a moment of panic so intense that Meghan allegedly had to improvise on the spot, adjusting clothing, posture, and even her demeanor to prevent exposure. It was a moment that insiders describe as suspenseful, almost cinematic, one that could have changed everything in an instant. And here's the cliffhanger that will keep you questioning everything. The nurse hints that there are documents, medical notes, and photographic evidence that could prove beyond doubt whether the pregnancy was genuine or staged. Evidence that is currently hidden from the public eye but could soon emerge, and when it does, the world may have to reconsider everything it thought it knew about the Duchess of Sussex. It's one thing to hear rumors, whispers, and speculation. It's another entirely when the person who lived it, the one who saw, touched, and tended to the Duchess in private, decides to speak. Meghan Markle's private nurse, whose identity has been carefully protected until now, is that person. And her account doesn't just raise questions. It rattles the very foundations of the story the world thought it knew. From the moment the nurse began working with Meghan, she sensed there was an unusual intensity surrounding the Duchess. Most patients are anxious, sure, but Meghan's demeanor, according to the nurse, was different. There was a calculated precision to her movements, a constant awareness of who was watching, and an almost obsessive control over how she was perceived. She's always aware, the nurse recalled. Every step, every gesture, every glance is measured. It's like she's performing for an invisible audience that never blinks. And in the context of a pregnancy, real or staged, that awareness takes on a life-or-death level of intensity, not physically, but psychologically. The nurse's accounts go beyond mere observation. She describes moments where Meghan would ask her to check the bump to ensure it looked correct for photographs or public appearances. There were nights when she would wake me, asking me to adjust padding, to reposition clothing, or to rehearse how she would move, the nurse revealed. Think about that for a second. How much pressure does it take to maintain a facade like this, night after night? And how isolating must it feel to live under constant scrutiny, even from those who are supposed to be your closest allies? This wasn't the only challenge. According to the nurse, there were times when Meghan would grow anxious about specific public appearances, charity events, interviews, family gatherings. Any event with cameras, even the smallest flash of media presence, triggered meticulous preparation. The nurse describes Meghan examining every outfit, adjusting fabrics, ensuring lighting wouldn't betray her secret. These weren't just minor adjustments. They were rehearsals in patience, poise, and deception. But why go to such lengths? The nurse says it wasn't vanity, exactly. It was narrative control. In Meghan's mind, appearances were reality. What the world believed shaped reality itself. If people saw a growing baby bump, they accepted it. If they didn't, questions arose. And in the high-stakes world of royal life, questions are dangerous. They undermine influence, spark controversy, and can destroy carefully curated images. According to the nurse, this mindset was obsessive, almost all-consuming. And then there's the evidence the nurse hints at. There are records, notes, and photographs, she says, almost cryptically. Not all of them align with what was publicly announced. Some were altered, some staged, some simply never happened. What she means is that the public timeline of Meghan's pregnancy may have been deliberately constructed to fit a specific narrative. A narrative that, if true, misled not only the media but also the public, the palace staff, and perhaps even Prince Harry himself. One of the most chilling parts of the nurse's account involves moments of secrecy. Certain appointments, she says, were conducted at unusual times, often in undisclosed locations. The goal was not just privacy, it was control. By managing every variable, Meghan could maintain the appearance of a normal pregnancy while concealing discrepancies that might expose the ruse. She wanted to ensure that if anyone looked, they would see exactly what she intended, the nurse said. Nothing more, nothing less. The nurse also provides insight into Meghan's emotional state during this period. According to her, the Duchess was under extreme psychological pressure. There were tears, moments of self-doubt, and periods of intense anxiety. Maintaining the illusion was not just a performance for others. It was a constant negotiation with her own fears and insecurities. It was exhausting, the nurse admits. I've never seen anyone so meticulous, so controlled, and yet so anxious at the same time. It's a paradox. She had to project calm while battling panic inside. This insight paints a picture that contrasts sharply with the public perception of Meghan. Outwardly poised, charismatic, and confident. Inwardly, according to the nurse, she was navigating a minefield of emotions, expectations, and scrutiny. And that tension, insiders say, contributed to some of the most controversial decisions surrounding Lilibet's supposed pregnancy. There's also a broader context to consider: the palace itself. Royal staff are trained to observe, report, and maintain discretion. Yet, the nurse indicates that even within the palace, inconsistencies were noticed. Some staff whispered, she said. Some noticed oddities, but nobody spoke openly. The rules are very clear. Loyalty above all, questions not allowed. In other words, there were witnesses to discrepancies, but silence was enforced, consciously or unconsciously, by tradition, fear, and protocol. Then came a particularly tense moment. According to the nurse, a surprise inspection could have revealed the truth. The Duchess was caught off guard, scrambling to maintain appearances. Padding had to be adjusted, gestures rehearsed, and expressions carefully controlled, all in real time, under observation. It was nerve-wracking, the nurse admitted. A slip here, a misstep there, and everything we had been maintaining for months could have collapsed. And yet, despite these pressures, Meghan maintained her composure publicly. Every photograph, every appearance, every interview was carefully orchestrated to convince the world that a real pregnancy was underway. It was brilliant, if you can call it that, the nurse said. She convinced everyone, family, media, public, because she believed the performance mattered more than reality. The nurse also highlights the complicity, or perhaps the unawareness, of Prince Harry. Publicly, he was supportive, involved, and engaged. Privately, however, he may not have been fully aware of the extent of the staging. The nurse hints at subtle moments of confusion, times when Harry asked questions that suggested he believed in the public narrative, not realizing that certain details had been manipulated. This adds a layer of complexity to the story. The image of a united, supportive royal couple may not tell the whole truth. And then there's the emotional fallout. For those who witnessed the performance up close, the staff, the medical team, the nurse herself, there was guilt, stress, and confusion. We were all part of it, whether we liked it or not, she confessed. Watching it unfold, knowing the truth but being powerless to speak, it's a strange, heavy feeling. You want to help, to intervene, but you can't. You're trapped between duty, loyalty, and morality. Finally, the nurse drops a hint about what's coming next, evidence that could make this story undeniable. She mentions documents, photographs, and records that, if released, would force a global audience to reconsider everything it thought it knew about Meghan's pregnancy and the birth of Lilibet. It's a tease, a promise that the narrative is far from over, and that the most shocking revelations may still lie ahead. As we close this chapter, the questions loom larger than ever. Was Meghan Markle's pregnancy entirely real, partially staged, or a masterclass in controlling perception? How did those closest to her navigate the complexities of truth and illusion? And most importantly, what happens when the evidence finally comes to light? When the world sees Meghan Markle at a royal event, it is not just Meghan Markle. It is the culmination of careful planning, styling, image management, and, according to insiders, an almost theatrical attention to detail. Every smile, every gesture, every curve of her purported baby bump was choreographed to perfection. But behind the cameras, behind the polished photos, there is a story that few outsiders have heard. A story of meticulous preparation, psychological pressure, and a network of people working to maintain an illusion that, if questioned, could have torn apart public perception and palace protocol alike. The nurse, who remained in Meghan's inner circle for months, gives the most revealing account yet. According to her, Meghan's pregnancy narrative was carefully constructed from day one. Not only were public appearances planned with military-like precision, but clothing, posture, and even hand placement were rehearsed. Every event had a checklist, the nurse explained. The angle of the bump, the lighting, what she said, and how she moved. Nothing was left to chance. Think about that for a moment. Every press appearance, every casual smile caught by photographers, every handshake, staged for maximum effect. And at the center of it all was the nurse, observing, adjusting, and ensuring that nothing betrayed the carefully orchestrated story. One of the most fascinating and alarming insights from the nurse is the degree to which physical preparation was required. Padding, strategic dresses, even small props were reportedly used to create the appearance of a progressing pregnancy. Sometimes it was subtle, almost imperceptible, the nurse said. Other times, it required multiple layers, adjustments, and rehearsals before Meghan was ready to be seen in public. These adjustments weren't just cosmetic. According to the nurse, they were essential to maintain a narrative that had been carefully pitched to the public and the media. One misstep, one poorly timed photograph, and the entire story risked unraveling. But it wasn't just the physical appearance that mattered. It was the story itself. Every public statement, every photo posted online, every mention in the press was curated to reinforce the idea of a happy, healthy pregnancy. Timing was crucial. Announcements were made at calculated intervals, designed to build anticipation and public empathy. Images of Meghan gently cradling her bump, sharing moments with Harry, or attending royal engagements were carefully positioned to strengthen the narrative. And according to the nurse, the couple's communications team worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that every story, every image, every detail aligned perfectly with the constructed narrative. Of course, crafting such an image requires immense psychological control. Meghan, according to the nurse, maintained an outward appearance of calm and composure, but internally, the pressure was immense. There were nights she would cry, the nurse revealed. Moments of self-doubt and anxiety when she felt the illusion might fail. It was a delicate balancing act, performing confidence while managing fear. For those on the inside, the tension was palpable. Staff members and aides had to adapt, ensuring they never accidentally exposed the discrepancies. Every routine, every interaction, became part of the performance. The nurse also recounted a particular incident that underscores the lengths Meghan went to maintain the illusion. During a surprise family visit, Meghan reportedly spent nearly 20 minutes adjusting clothing, padding, and posture before entering the room. It was a mixture of precision and panic, the nurse said. Every detail mattered, because a single mistake could have exposed everything we were trying to protect. It wasn't just about appearances. It was about controlling perception, shaping the narrative, and ensuring that the public and family alike believed in a story that may not have been entirely real. And this carefully curated image extended to Harry as well. While he appeared supportive and engaged, the nurse hinted that he was not fully aware of every detail behind the scenes. Moments of confusion or hesitation suggested that he may have been partially misled, or at least not fully involved in the staging. This adds an additional layer of complexity to the narrative. The public sees a united, supportive couple, while behind closed doors, there may have been tension, uncertainty, and miscommunication. Another surprising aspect, according to the nurse, was how even minor events were manipulated for public perception. Charity visits, casual walks, and informal family moments were all prepped in advance. Lighting, angles, and attire were calculated to reinforce the narrative. Nothing was left to chance, the nurse said. Even informal moments had to tell the right story. This level of attention to detail is extraordinary, reflecting both the intense pressure Meghan faced and the extent to which image and perception dominated her daily life. Yet, despite all this preparation, cracks appeared. The nurse described instances where the public image almost faltered. Moments when the bump did not sit right, when a gesture looked unnatural, or when a photograph captured something unintended. These small disruptions, though seemingly minor, carried enormous risk. In the world of royal media, perception is everything. A single photograph can dominate headlines, influence public opinion, and shift narratives within the palace. Maintaining control in such an environment is not merely a challenge, it is a high-stakes endeavor. The nurse's revelations also touch on the broader implications of controlling narrative in a modern royal context. In today's media landscape, where social media amplifies every detail and the public consumes images voraciously, the line between reality and perception becomes blurred. According to the nurse, Meghan understood this perfectly. The apparent pregnancy was not merely a personal or private matter. It was a public story, a performance with far-reaching consequences. Every appearance reinforced her image, every smile maintained belief, and every photograph told a controlled story designed to shape perception. Finally, the nurse hints at what may be the most explosive revelation yet. There is documented evidence, medical notes, photographs, and private communications that directly contradict the publicly presented timeline of the pregnancy. These materials, she claims, could prove whether the pregnancy was entirely authentic, partially staged, or meticulously orchestrated. And when that evidence eventually comes to light, it could fundamentally change the public's understanding of Meghan Markle, her family, and even the events surrounding Lilibet's birth. The questions now loom larger than ever. How much of Meghan's public image is genuine? How much is performance? And what happens when the narrative meticulously crafted for years collides with the truth? The nurse's account leaves us with no easy answers. But one thing is certain. What comes next will challenge everything the public thought it knew about the Duchess of Sussex. When people think of royal scandals, they often imagine shadowy whispers, anonymous leaks, and tabloids spinning tales with no proof. But according to Meghan Markle's private nurse, this story is different. The evidence exists. And it's closer than anyone imagined. Hidden in plain sight, carefully recorded and meticulously documented, it paints a picture that could either confirm suspicions or ignite a controversy unlike anything the royal family has seen in decades. The nurse described the first signs of what she later realized was damning evidence as subtle inconsistencies. Appointment records, originally intended for internal monitoring, did not align with public announcements. Ultrasound timelines were mismatched, visits to medical specialists were scheduled at unusual intervals, and documented notes occasionally contradicted what the public had been told. For a casual observer, these details might have gone unnoticed. But for someone trained in medical monitoring and accustomed to precision, the discrepancies were impossible to ignore. I started noticing patterns, the nurse said. Small at first. Then it became clear, something wasn't adding up. She recalls the moment when the pattern became undeniable. While reviewing her own notes for a routine internal audit, she found a series of documents that directly contradicted the publicly shared timeline. I almost dropped the folder, she admitted. Everything we had been maintaining, the story, the appearances, the narrative, was now in question. And in that instant, she realized the implications were enormous. Not just for Meghan, not just for Harry, but for the perception of the royal family on a global scale. Among the most striking pieces of evidence were photographs taken during private medical visits. While public images portrayed a steadily growing pregnancy bump, some private photos suggested otherwise. According to the nurse, padding and clothing adjustments were repeatedly used to maintain the illusion. There are images where the bump looks different from one day to the next, even though no physical changes could have occurred naturally in that time frame. She explained, "These photos, when viewed in sequence, tell a story that seems at odds with the narrative presented to the public." Even more revealing were the internal communications, emails and notes between Meghan, her advisors, and the medical staff. They included instructions for appearance adjustments, detailed schedules for public appearances, and notes on how to handle unexpected situations. One such message, the nurse revealed, specifically outlined how to position clothing and use padding for a key photo opportunity. It was incredibly detailed, the nurse said. They were planning for every possible angle, every camera shot, and even potential questions from the media. This level of coordination suggests not just an effort to present a polished image, but a deliberate attempt to control the narrative in a way that borders on orchestration. The nurse also described a specific incident that illustrates the high stakes involved. During a family event, a close relative unexpectedly appeared early before the planned photo session. Panic set in. Meghan allegedly spent several minutes adjusting her clothing and padding, practicing gestures, and rehearsing expressions in a private room before entering the gathering. Every move had to be perfect, the nurse recalled. Any misstep could have exposed what we were trying to hide. And believe me, everyone in the room felt the tension. It was a high-pressure scenario, one that highlights the psychological strain and meticulous planning involved in maintaining the appearance of a pregnancy. In addition to photographs and notes, medical records themselves contained anomalies. Some appointments documented procedures or check-ins that didn't match the standard gestational timeline, while others were marked as routine but coincided suspiciously with media events. According to the nurse, this coordination was no accident. It was all planned to make sure there were no contradictions between what the public saw and what actually happened, she said. These small but critical details, when pieced together, form a mosaic that raises serious questions about the authenticity of the pregnancy. The implications extend beyond appearances. For the royal family, perception is everything. A disruption in narrative can create public distrust, media frenzy, and internal tension. According to insiders, the palace staff noticed some of these inconsistencies, but the culture of silence and loyalty prevented them from raising alarms. Only now, through the nurse's testimony and the hidden evidence she has revealed, are these secrets coming to light. People think they know the story, she said. But the documents tell a very different tale, one that the public has never seen until now. This chapter of evidence also touches on timing. Each piece of documentation, each photograph, each note was carefully timed to ensure a coherent public narrative. Yet, when examined retrospectively, patterns emerge that suggest deliberate orchestration. Scheduling anomalies, visual inconsistencies, and communications instructions collectively point to a level of planning that few outside Meghan's inner circle could have anticipated. It wasn't chaotic or accidental, the nurse explained. It was calculated and controlled. That's what makes it so compelling and so concerning. And just when it seems like the story cannot get any more explosive, the nurse drops a hint about the most damning evidence yet. There is one record, kept meticulously and hidden carefully, that could, in her words, blow the narrative apart. She cannot reveal it publicly yet, citing legal and personal safety concerns, but the suggestion alone is enough to ignite speculation. What could this single record show? Could it definitively prove that Meghan's pregnancy was staged? Or does it contain details that complicate the story even further, implicating others in the process? The evidence also raises questions about trust and loyalty. For those who worked closely with Meghan, knowing the truth yet being unable to speak carried enormous weight. "I had to keep it secret for months," the nurse said. "Every day felt heavier than the last, knowing what I knew but being powerless to change anything. I feared professional consequences, public backlash, and personal attacks. But the moral imperative to speak finally outweighed all those fears." Her decision to come forward marks a pivotal moment in the story. one that transforms speculation into a tangible, documentable controversy. And as the chapter closes, we are left with a critical question. If this evidence is credible, what happens next? Will it be revealed to the public, or will it remain behind closed doors, safeguarded by legal agreements and palace protocol? How will Prince Harry respond? How will the public react? And most importantly, how will Meghan Markle's carefully crafted image withstand the scrutiny now that the hidden documents have been brought into the light? Secrets have a way of surfacing, and in Meghan Markle's world, nothing stays hidden for long. Once the nurse's revelations began circulating, the story exploded like a spark hitting dry tinder. The moment the first whispers of a potentially staged pregnancy reached the media, journalists around the world pounced, eager to dissect every detail, question every image, and speculate endlessly. Suddenly, the carefully curated narrative that Meghan and her team had maintained for months, or perhaps years, was facing a storm the likes of which even palace insiders rarely witness. The nurse described the initial days after the story broke as overwhelming. Calls from journalists, anonymous tips, and media inquiries flooded in, each seeking confirmation, comment, or an exclusive. It was a tidal wave, the nurse recalled. Suddenly, what had been private, behind-the-scenes observations became front-page news. Even the most seasoned reporters were captivated by the story. After all, it had everything that sells papers and drives clicks: royalty, secrecy, a potential scandal, and an element of deception that, if true, would shake the monarchy to its core. Social media amplified the story further. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok became hotbeds of speculation. Memes circulated, threads debated the nurse's credibility, and video clips of past public appearances were scrutinized for any evidence of inconsistencies. One moment, a photo of Meghan cradling her bump was celebrated as an iconic royal image. The next, the same photo was examined frame by frame, with fans and skeptics pointing out subtle changes, folds in clothing, and lighting effects that might suggest a staged appearance. The public became amateur detectives, poring over every detail in a frenzy of curiosity and disbelief. But the media storm wasn't just about visuals. Analysts, royal commentators, and former palace aides began weighing in, interpreting the nurse's statements, contextualizing them within the broader history of Meghan's public life, and debating the possible motivations behind the alleged deception. Some argued that the revelations painted Meghan as controlling and manipulative. Others suggested that the scrutiny itself had driven her to take extreme measures, highlighting the immense pressures of royal life. Opinions were polarized, discussions heated, and the story gained momentum far beyond the initial leak. Inside the palace, the reaction was equally intense, though far more guarded. Staff members scrambled to assess the impact, senior aides discussed potential public relations strategies, and legal teams reviewed the implications. According to insiders, there was a palpable sense of anxiety. If the nurse's claims were corroborated or supported with tangible evidence, the narrative could damage reputations, relationships, and public trust. One source described the situation as a minefield, and every step felt like navigating in the dark. Even small missteps could escalate into global headlines, and the palace was acutely aware of the stakes. The nurse recounted her own experience navigating this chaos. Every day brought new challenges. Interviews, clarifications, legal questions, and the constant pressure to ensure that her disclosures were accurate. She emphasized that coming forward was not a decision made lightly. "I understood the magnitude of what I was revealing," she said. "I knew it could hurt reputations, careers, and even personal relationships. But the truth demanded to be heard." Her courage, she says, stems from a commitment to honesty and transparency. Values she felt were more important than silence or self-preservation. What made this media storm particularly intense was the timing. The revelations coincided with heightened scrutiny of Meghan's activities, public appearances, and relationships within the royal family. Any past missteps were magnified, and minor inconsistencies in her timeline became fodder for speculation. Analysts dissected interviews, comparing statements with medical records, photographs, and internal communications. The public, fueled by curiosity and intrigue, followed every update, every leak, every rumor, with almost obsessive attention. Interestingly, the media coverage revealed not just interest in Meghan herself, but also fascination with the broader implications for the royal family. Questions emerged. Was this an isolated instance of image management, or did it suggest a systemic approach to controlling public perception? How did Prince Harry fit into the narrative? Were staff members complicit, or were they simply caught in an environment that demanded silence? Each question added layers of complexity, turning what might have been a personal controversy into a story of institutional intrigue, secrecy, and power. The nurse also described the psychological impact of the media frenzy. "It's one thing to witness the story behind closed doors," she said. "It's another to see it unfold publicly, dissected, debated, and questioned by millions." It was overwhelming and at times terrifying. Despite the intensity, she remained committed to her account, emphasizing that her observations were factual, firsthand, and carefully documented. And as the story spread, new elements emerged. Leaks suggested additional documentation existed, photographs, schedules, and private communications that could further support or complicate the narrative. Insiders began whispering about a potential smoking gun, a piece of evidence that might definitively settle the question of whether Meghan's pregnancy was genuine or staged. The suspense gripped the public. News cycles churned nonstop, and every new headline intensified curiosity, speculation, and debate. The media storm also prompted responses from celebrity commentators and royal watchers worldwide. Some defended Meghan, suggesting that the pressures of public life and intense scrutiny could drive someone to extraordinary measures. Others criticized the alleged actions, framing them as manipulative, controlling, and deceitful. Memes, commentary, and think pieces multiplied, creating a feedback loop that ensured the story would not fade from public consciousness anytime soon. And just when it seemed the storm might stabilize, the nurse revealed another shocking detail. There was one photograph, taken privately, that captured a moment so revealing it could rewrite the public narrative entirely. She could not disclose the image publicly yet, citing legal and safety concerns, but the implication alone was enough to send shockwaves through journalists, insiders, and royal enthusiasts alike. "It's one thing to speculate," she said. "It's another to have a concrete visual that leaves no room for doubt." This chapter closes with the understanding that when secrets collide with the media spotlight, the consequences are unpredictable, far-reaching, and often explosive. The nurse's revelations had already shaken the foundations of public perception, and the evidence hinted at even more dramatic revelations still to come. When a story of this magnitude begins to surface, the palace does not remain silent. But the response is never immediate and rarely transparent. According to sources close to the inner circle, Meghan Markle's alleged staged pregnancy triggered a flurry of activity behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Kensington Palace. Panic, coordination, damage control, and above all, an urgent need to protect the institution's image at all costs. The nurse described the initial palace reaction as controlled chaos. Senior aides convened emergency meetings to assess the potential impact of her disclosures. Legal teams analyzed the statements for possible libel, reputational harm, and the scope of potential evidence that could emerge. Communication strategists began drafting responses, press lines, and contingency plans. The overarching goal was simple: contain the story before it spiraled out of control. Yet, in trying to contain it, the palace staff faced a dilemma: how to preserve public confidence while acknowledging the leaks, without validating the nurse's claims. According to insiders, the royal household was particularly concerned about timing. The story broke during a period of heightened public scrutiny of Meghan and Harry. Every interview, every charity appearance, every public announcement was now a potential minefield. Senior officials reportedly debated whether to address the issue directly, issue a measured statement, or maintain strategic silence. Each option carried risk. Silence could be perceived as guilt or avoidance, while a statement might inadvertently confirm details the palace wished to remain private. The nurse revealed moments of behind-the-scenes tension that illustrate the extraordinary pressure on palace staff. Private meetings, sometimes lasting hours, were described as intense and fraught with anxiety. People were pacing, taking notes, whispering, she recalled. The fear of making a mistake was palpable. One wrong word, and the media could spin it into a catastrophe. And unlike ordinary organizations, the stakes were not just reputational. They were historical, affecting centuries of royal legacy and public trust. One of the most revealing aspects the nurse shared involves the internal perception of Meghan herself. According to insiders, there were divided opinions. Some staff believed she was genuinely overwhelmed by the pressures of pregnancy and public life, possibly leading to unintentional discrepancies. Others suspected deliberate orchestration, a calculated attempt to manage public perception. These differing viewpoints created internal friction, with some staff members advocating for careful intervention and others urging strict adherence to protocol, leaving the palace caught between loyalty, risk, and the need for accuracy. The psychological strain extended to the family. Prince Harry, for example, reportedly found himself in a difficult position. Privately, he was aware of minor inconsistencies, but the full scope of the situation was unclear. Conflicting accounts, secrecy, and internal palace pressures created a climate of uncertainty. According to the nurse, Harry's protective instincts were heightened, and his loyalty to Meghan complicated matters further. He wanted to shield her, the nurse said. But there were moments when even he questioned what was happening behind closed doors. Meanwhile, the palace's communications team worked overtime to manage the narrative externally. Carefully worded statements were drafted and revised, talking points prepared for media interviews, and contingency plans laid in case the nurse's evidence became public. Every step reflected the understanding that perception is reality in the world of royalty, even if a pregnancy is staged or partially staged. The optics matter more than the truth in maintaining public confidence. One particularly tense episode involved an internal audit of documents, records, and communications. The palace sought to verify the authenticity of schedules, appointments, and other potentially sensitive material. It was a quiet panic, the nurse said. People were searching for anything that could contradict or support the narrative. The pressure was intense, and the stakes were enormous. This audit, she notes, revealed gaps, inconsistencies, and anomalies that could not easily be explained away, further intensifying the palace's anxiety. The nurse also described a private confrontation with senior palace staff that she witnessed during this period. It occurred after a particularly damaging media leak, and tensions reportedly escalated into raised voices, pointed accusations, and urgent demands for answers. It was shocking to see, she said. People who were normally calm, professional, and composed were suddenly arguing, frustrated, and desperate. The palace was struggling to maintain control over a situation that was quickly spinning beyond its grasp. Amid all this chaos, the Duchess of Sussex herself was reportedly monitoring the situation closely. The nurse notes that Meghan was calculated, observing, and, at times, anxious. While maintaining public composure, she allegedly continued to manage appearances privately, adjusting clothing, posture, and timing for events, ensuring that even as the storm brewed, she remained in control of the image presented to the public. She was meticulous, the nurse said. Even under pressure, her priority was to maintain appearances, no matter the cost. The internal dynamics of the palace during this period highlight the unique pressures of royalty in the digital age. Information travels faster than ever, and leaks, intentional or accidental, can have global consequences within hours. For Meghan, Harry, and the staff, navigating this landscape required careful coordination, secrecy, and an awareness that every move could be scrutinized publicly. And according to the nurse, some staff members were increasingly uneasy with the ethical and moral implications of the situation. Yet, despite the tension, the palace understood that the public's attention could not be underestimated. Every new revelation, every detail shared by the nurse or picked up by media outlets could shift public perception. The stakes were not merely professional, they were historical. A single misstep could tarnish reputations, alter legacies, and potentially reshape the narrative of Meghan Markle's role in the royal family for years to come. As this chapter closes, the stage is set for a confrontation between secrecy, media scrutiny, and the pursuit of truth. The palace may attempt to manage the optics, But the nurse's revelations and the hidden evidence she holds have already ignited a chain reaction. Questions now dominate every conversation. How far does the palace go to protect its image? Can loyalty survive when secrecy becomes unsustainable? And what will happen when the first incontrovertible proof emerges? Proof that could upend everything? Leaks are the lifeblood of a media storm, and when Meghan Markle's alleged staged pregnancy first reached the press, it sparked a frenzy that no one could have predicted. What began as whispers behind palace walls quickly escalated into headlines splashed across every major news outlet. Suddenly, a story once contained to private medical records and insider testimony became global fodder, debated in living rooms, social media feeds, and newsrooms alike. According to the nurse, the first leak occurred almost accidentally. "I never intended for it to reach the press so quickly," she said. "I was simply providing information to a trusted intermediary, someone I thought would handle it carefully. But once it got out, the floodgates opened." Within hours, journalists were reaching out, asking questions, and piecing together fragments of information into a cohesive narrative. And while the details were initially sparse, the implications were explosive. The initial reports were cautious. Headlines suggested discrepancies in timelines, unusual medical appointments, and inconsistencies in public appearances. Some outlets framed it as mere speculation. Others hinted at deliberate orchestration. Social media amplified the uncertainty, turning cautious reporting into full-blown conspiracy discussions. Analysts debated the plausibility of a staged pregnancy, while fans and critics alike combed over photographs and videos, searching for signs, cues, or evidence that might validate or refute the claims. The palace, meanwhile, scrambled to manage the fallout. According to insiders, damage control efforts began almost immediately. Communications teams drafted statements emphasizing privacy and the sanctity of personal medical matters, while legal teams examined the potential for defamation or reputational harm. Staff members monitored the media landscape, assessing which outlets were credible and which were likely to sensationalize or distort the story. It was a delicate balancing act, the nurse recalled. Every action had to be considered carefully because even a small misstep could make the situation worse. The leak also had profound psychological effects on those involved. For Meghan, the pressure intensified. Public scrutiny escalated from polite curiosity to intense examination. Every photograph, every interview, and every appearance was analyzed for inconsistencies, feeding speculation that the pregnancy had been manipulated. The nurse described moments of visible anxiety and stress. She would ask for adjustments, double-check how she looked in videos, and even rehearse gestures to make sure everything appeared consistent. The attention was relentless. Prince Harry, too, was affected. The public perception of support and unity clashed with private realities. He reportedly struggled to navigate the tension between defending his wife, protecting the family, and maintaining his own public image. According to the nurse, there were moments when even he seemed uncertain, caught between loyalty and doubt. He wanted to believe the narrative he had been shown, she said. But the inconsistencies were impossible to ignore. As the media frenzy grew, other insiders began coming forward, either corroborating elements of the nurse's account or adding new details. Former staff, royal aides, and medical professionals shared anecdotes that painted a picture of meticulous planning, calculated appearances, and controlled narratives. Collectively, these accounts created a mosaic that was far more compelling than any single report. It wasn't just gossip, it was a structured, corroborated series of observations that challenged the public story. One of the most dramatic elements involved images from private settings that somehow leaked to reporters. According to the nurse, these images showed moments of adjustment, the careful use of padding, and the subtle staging of gestures. While initially dismissed by some as routine, repeated analysis revealed patterns that could not easily be explained by coincidence. Media outlets began highlighting these images, comparing them with public appearances, and pointing out discrepancies that fueled the story's momentum. Social media played a critical role in amplifying the first leak. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter allowed rapid dissemination of both speculation and analysis. Memes, video edits, and side-by-side photo comparisons spread like wildfire, engaging the public in a collective investigation. Hashtags trended globally, and discussion forums filled with debates about authenticity, intention, and royal protocol. Ordinary people became amateur analysts, and the story's virality ensured that it would dominate public conversation for weeks, if not months. The nurse also highlighted the strategic timing of the leak. While it may have initially seemed accidental, insiders now believe the leak was designed to test public reaction. By releasing only fragments of information, the story could gauge response, prepare palace defenses, and potentially shape the narrative before the full scope of evidence emerged. It's hard to know whether it was deliberate or chance, she said. But the way it unfolded gave the palace, and Meghan's team, time to plan their next moves. And then came the tipping point. The first article to explicitly suggest that Meghan's pregnancy may have been staged. It didn't just question the timeline. It implied a level of orchestration that went beyond mere optics. Editors highlighted photographic discrepancies, appointment anomalies, and insider testimony. The article went viral within hours, igniting debate across